Rainer. Copyright Carl Wilhelm Johann Joseph Maria Rilke better known as Rainer Maria Rilke was a Bohemian Austrian poet and novelist, widely recognized as one of the most lyrically intense German-language poets, writing in both verse and highly lyrical prose. Several critics have described Rilke's work as inherently mystical. His writings include one novel, several collections of poetry, and several volumes of correspondence in which he invokes haunting images that focus on the difficulty of communion with the ineffable in an age of disbelief, solitude, and profound anxiety. These deeply existential themes tend to position him as a transitional figure between the traditional and the modernist writers. Rilke was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, traveled extensively throughout Europe and North Africa, including Russia, Spain, Germany, France, Italy, and in his later years settled in Switzerland. Settings that were key to the genesis and inspiration for many of his poems. While Rilke is most known for his contributions to German literature, over 400 poems were originally written in French and dedicated to the canton of Valais in Switzerland. Among English-language readers, his best-known works include the poetry collections Duino Elegies and Sonnets to Orpheus, the semi-autobiographical novel The Notebooks of Malte Laurids Brigge, and a collection of 10 letters that was published after his death under the title Letters to a Young Poet. In the later 20th century, his work has found new audiences through its use by New Age theologians and self-help authors, and through frequent quoting in television programs, books and motion pictures. In the United States, Rilke is one of the more popular, best-selling poets along with 13th-century Sufi mystic Rumi and 20th-century Lebanese-American poet Khalil Gibran. Biography, early life. He was born Rainer. Copyright Carl Wilhelm Johann Joseph Maria Rilke in Prague, capital of Bohemia. His childhood and youth in Prague were not especially happy. His father, Joseph Rilke, became a railway official after an unsuccessful military career. His mother, Sophie Ince, came from a well-to-do Prague family, the Ince-Kinzelbergers, who lived in a house on the Herrengasse, where Rainer also spent many of his early years. The relationship between Fire and her only son was colored by her mourning for an earlier child, a daughter who had died only 1 week old. During Rilke's early years, Fire acted as if she sought to recover the lost girl through the boy by dressing him in girl's clothing. His parents' marriage failed in 1884. His parents pressured the poetically and artistically talented youth into entering a military academy, which he attended from 1886 until 1891, when he left owing to illness. From 1892 to 1895 he was tutored for the university entrance exam, which he passed in 1895. Until 1896 he studied literature, art history, and philosophy in Prague and Munich. Munich and St. Petersburg, Indiana, 1897. In Munich, Rainer Maria Rilke met and fell in love with the widely traveled, intellectual woman of letters Lou Andreas Salome. Copyright Rilke changed his first name from Rainer to Rainer at Lou's urging because she thought that name more masculine, forceful, and Germanic. His relationship with this married woman, with whom he undertook 2 extensive trips to Russia, lasted until 1900. But even after their separation, Lou continued to be Rilke's most important confidant until the end of his life. Having trained from 1912 to 1913 as a psychoanalyst with Sigmund Freud, she shared her knowledge of psychoanalysis with Rilke. In 1898, Rilke undertook a journey lasting several weeks to Italy. In 1899, he traveled with Lou and her husband, Friedrich Andreas, to Moscow where he met the novelist Leo Tolstoy. Between May and August 1900, a second journey to Russia, accompanied only by Lou, again took him to Moscow and St. Petersburg, where he met the family of Boris Pasternak and Spiridon Drozin, a peasant poet. Author Anna A. Tavis cites the cultures of Bohemia and Russia as the key influences on Rilke's poetry and consciousness. In 1900, Rilke stayed at the artists' colony at Werpswede. It was here that he got to know the sculptor Clara Westhoff, whom he married the following year. Their daughter Ruth was born in December 1901. Paris. In the summer of 1902, Rilke left home and traveled to Paris to write a monograph on the sculptor Auguste Rodin. Before long his wife left their daughter with her parents and joined Rilke there. The relationship between Rilke and Clara Westhoff continued for the rest of his life. A mutually agreed-upon effort at divorce was bureaucratically hindered by Rilke's official status as a Catholic, though a non-practicing one. At first, Rilke had a difficult time in Paris, an experience that he called on in the first part of his only novel, The Notebooks of Malte Laurids Brigge. At the same time, his encounter with modernism was very stimulating. Rilke became deeply involved in the sculpture of Rodin, and then with the work of Paul Carr copyright Zan. For a time he acted as Rodin's secretary, also lecturing and writing a long essay on Rodin and his work. Rodin taught him the value of objective observation, and under this influence Rilke dramatically transformed his poetic style from the subjective and sometimes incantatory language of his earlier work into something quite new in European literature. The result was the new poems, famous for the Thing poems expressing Rilke's rejuvenated artistic vision. During these years, Paris increasingly became the writer's main residence. The most important works of the Paris period were Ne Gedicht, Der Neuen Gedicht and a Tale, the two Requiem poems, and the novel The Notebooks of Malte Laurids Brigge, started in 1904 and completed in January 1910. During the later part of this decade Rilke spent extended periods in Ronda, the famous bullfighting center in southern Spain. There he kept a permanent room at the Hotel Reina Victoria where his room remains to this day as he left it, a mini-museum of Rilke. Duino and the First World War. Between October 1911 and May 1912, Rilke stayed at the Castle Duino, near Trieste, home of Princess Marie of Thurn-on-Taxis. There, in 1912, he began the poem cycle called the Duino Elegies, which would remain unfinished for a decade because of a long-lasting creativity crisis. The outbreak of World War I surprised Rilke during a stay in Germany. He was unable to return to Paris, where his property was confiscated and auctioned. He spent the greater part of the war in Munich. From 1914 to 1916 he had a turbulent affair with the painter Louis Albert Lazard. Rilke was called up at the beginning of 1916, and he had to undertake basic training in Vienna. Influential friends interceded on his behalf, and he was transferred to the War Records Office and discharged from the military on June 9, 1916. He spent the subsequent time once again in Munich, interrupted by a stay on Hertha Königsgute Bokel in Westphalia. The traumatic experience of military service, a reminder of the horrors of the military academy, almost completely silenced him as a poet. Switzerland and Musot. On June 11, 1919, Rilke traveled from Munich to Switzerland. The outward motive was an invitation to lecture in Zurich, but the real reason was the wish to escape the post-war chaos and take up his work on the Duino Elegies once again. The search for a suitable and affordable place to live proved to be very difficult. Among other places, Rilke lived in Soglio, Locarno, and Bergamo. Only in mid-1921 was he able to find a permanent residence in the Car Centre de Musot in the commune of Viras, close to Sayre in Valais. In an intense creative period, Rilke completed the Duino Elegies in several weeks in February 1922. Before and after, Rilke rapidly wrote both parts of the poem cycle Sonnets to Orpheus containing 55 entire sonnets. Both works together have often been taken as constituting the high points of Rilke's work. In May 1922, Rilke's patron Werner Reinhardt bought and renovated Musot so that Rilke could live there rent-free. During this time, Reinhardt introduced Rilke to his proto-copyright copyrightee, the Australian violinist Alma Moody. Rilke was so impressed with her playing that he wrote in a letter, "What a sound, what richness, what determination. That and the sonnets to Orpheus, those were two strings of the same voice. And she plays mostly Bach." Musot has received its musical christening. From 1923 on, Rilke increasingly had to struggle with health problems that necessitated many long stays at a sanatorium in Terreitet, near Montreux, on Lake Geneva. His long stay in Paris between January and August 1925 was an attempt to escape his illness through a change in location and living conditions. Despite this, Numerous important individual poems appeared in the years 1923–1926, as well as the abundant lyrical work in French. In January and February 1926 Rilke wrote 3 letters to the Mussolini adversary Aurelio Gallerati Scotti, in which he praised Benito Mussolini and described fascism as a healing agent. Death and burial. Shortly before his death Rilke's illness was diagnosed as leukemia. He suffered ulcerous sores in his mouth, pain troubled his stomach and intestines, and he struggled with increasingly low spirits. Open-eyed, he died in the arms of his doctor on December 29, 1926 in the Varmont Sanatorium in Switzerland. He was buried on January 2, 1927 in the Raron Cemetery to the west of Visp. Rilke had chosen as his own epitaph this poem. A myth developed surrounding his death and roses. It was said, to honor a visitor, the Egyptian beauty Nimmt, Rilke gathered some roses from his garden. While doing so, he pricked his hand on a thorn. This small wound failed to heal, grew rapidly worse, soon his entire arm was swollen, and his other arm became affected as well, and so he died. Writings, the Book of Hours. Rilke published the 3 complete cycles of poems that constitute the Book of Hours in April 1905. These poems explore the Christian search for God and the nature of prayer, using symbolism from St. Francis and Rilke's observation of Orthodox Christianity during his travels in Russia in the early years of the 20th century. The Notebooks of Malte Laurids Brigge. Rilke wrote his only novel, Die Aufzeichnungen des Malte Laurids Brigge, while living in Paris and completed the work in 1910. The novel is semi-autobiographical, and he adopts the style and technique that became associated with the expressionism that entered European fiction and art in the early 20th century. Rilke was inspired by Sigbjarne Obstfelder's work A Priest's Diary and Jens Peter Jacobson's second novel Niels Linn, which traces the fate of an atheist in a merciless world. Rilke addresses existential themes, profoundly probing the quest for individuality, the significance of death, and reflection on the experience of time as death approaches. Rilke draws considerably on the writings of Nietzsche, whose work he came to know through his lover, Nietzsche's former lover Lou Andreas Salome. His work also incorporates impressionistic techniques that were influenced by the painter Carl Copyright Cézanne, and sculptor Rodin. He combines these techniques and motifs to conjure images of mankind's anxiety and alienation in the face of an increasingly scientific, industrial, reified world. Duino Elegies. Rilke began writing the elegies in 1912 while a guest of Princess Marie von Thurn-und-Taxis at Duino Castle, near Trieste on the Adriatic Sea. During this 10-year period, the elegies languished incomplete for long stretches of time as Rilke suffered frequently from severe depression, some of which was caused by the events of World War I and his conscripted military service. Aside from brief episodes of writing in 1913 and 1915, Rilke did not return to the work until a few years after the war ended. With a sudden, renewed inspiration writing in a frantic pace he described as a savage creative storm he completed the collection in February 1922 while staying at Car Centre de Musot in Viras, in Switzerland's Rhone Valley. After their publication and his death shortly thereafter, the Duino Elegies were quickly recognized by critics and scholars as Rilke's most important work. The Duino Elegies are intensely religious, mystical poems that weigh beauty and existential suffering. The poems employ a rich symbolism of angels and salvation but not in keeping with typical Christian interpretations. Rilke begins the first elegy in an invocation of philosophical despair, asking, "Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the hierarchies of angels?" and later declares that every angel is terrifying. While labeling of these poems as elegies would typically imply melancholy and lamentation, many passages are marked by their positive energy and unrestrained enthusiasm. Together, the Duino Elegies are described as a metamorphosis of Rilke's ontological torment, and an impassioned monologue about coming to terms with human existence, discussing themes of the limitations and insufficiency of the human condition and fractured human consciousness. Man's loneliness, the perfection of the angels, life and death, love and lovers, and the task of the poet. Sonnets to Orpheus. With news of the death of his daughter's friend, Werner, Rilke was inspired to create and set to work on sonnets to Orpheus. Within a few days, between February 2 and February 5, 1922, he had completed the first section of 26 sonnets. For the next few days, he focused on the duino elegies, completing them on the evening of February 11. Immediately after, he returned to work on the sonnets and completed the following section of 29 sonnets in less than 2 weeks. Throughout the sonnets, Werner appears in frequent references to her, both direct where he addresses her by name and indirect as allusions to a dancer, or the mythical Eurydice. Although Rilke claimed that the entire cycle was inspired by Werner, she appears as a character in only one of the poems. He insisted, however, that Werner's own figure nevertheless governs and moves the course of the whole. The content of the sonnets is, as is typical of Rilke, highly metaphorical. The character of Orpheus appears several times in the cycle, as do other mythical characters such as Daphne. There are also biblical allusions, including a reference to Esau. Other themes involve animals, peoples of different cultures, and time and death. Letters to a young poet. In 1929, a minor writer, Franz Xaver Kappus, published a collection of 10 letters that Rilke had written to him when he was a 19-year-old officer cadet studying at the Theresian Military Academy in Wiener Neustadt. The young Kappus wrote to Rilke, who had also attended the academy, between 1902 and 1908 when he was uncertain about his future career as a military officer or as a poet. Initially, he sought Rilke's advice as to the quality of his poetry, and whether he ought to pursue writing as a career. While he declined to comment on Kappus's writings, Rilke advised Kappus on how a poet should feel, love, and seek truth in trying to understand and experience the world around him and engage the world of art. These letters offer insight into the ideas and themes that appear in Rilke's poetry and his working process. Further, these letters were written during a key period of Rilke's early artistic development after his reputation as a poet began to be established with the publication of parts of Das Stundenbuch and Das Buch der Bilder. Rilke's literary style. Figures from Greek mythology recur as motifs in his poems and are depicted in original interpretations. Other recurring figures in Rilke's poems are angels, roses and a character of a poet and his creative work. Rilke often worked with metaphors, metonymy and contradictions. Rilke's little-known 1898 poem, Visions of Christ, depicted Mary Magdalene as the mother to Jesus' child. Quoting Susan Haskins, it was Rilke's explicit belief that Christ was not divine, was entirely human, and deified only on Calvary, expressed in an unpublished poem of 1893, and referred to in other poems of the same period, which allowed him to portray Christ's love for Mary Magdalene, though remarkable, as entirely human. Legacy. In the United States, Rilke is one of the more popular, best-selling poets along with 13th-century Sufi mystic Rumi, and 20th-century Lebanese-American poet Khalil Gibran. In popular culture, Rilke is frequently quoted or referenced in television programs, motion pictures, music and other works when these works discuss the subject of love or angels. Because of his work being described as mystical, Rilke's works have also been appropriated for use by the New Age community and in self-help books. Rilke has been reinterpreted as a master who can lead us to a more fulfilled and less anxious life. Rilke's work, and specifically, the duino elegies, have been claimed as a deep influence by several poets and writers, including Galway Kinnell, Sidney Keys, Stephen Spender, Robert Bly, W. S. Merwin, John Ashbery, novelist Thomas Pynchon and philosophers Ludwig Wittgenstein and Hans-Georg Gadamer. British poet W. H. Auden has been described as Rilke's most influential English disciple, and he frequently paid homage to him, or used the imagery of angels in his work. Works. See also: Balladine Klaus Oskar, Rainer Maria Rilke Foundation in Sayre, Switzerland. References, notes. Further reading: Biographies, Friedman, Ralph, Life of a Poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, New York, 1996. Prater, Donald, A Ringing Glass, The Life of Rainer Maria Rilke, Oxford University Press, 1994. Tapper, Mirjam, Riza med Rilke, Meter Bock for Paragraph RLAG. Tojason, Eric, Dear Friend, Rainer Maria Rilke and Paula Modersohn Becker, Northwestern University Press, 1998. Critical Studies, Engel, Manfred and Lauterbach, Dorothea, Rilke Handbuch, Leben Worker Wakung, Stuttgart, Metzler, 2004. Erika, A. and Metzger, Michael, A Companion to the Works of Rainer Maria Rilke, Rochester, 2001. Goss, William H. Reading Rilke, Reflections on the Problems of Translation, Alfred A. Knopf, 2000. Goldsmith, Ulrich, ed., Rainer Maria Rilke, A Verse Concordance to His Complete Lyrical Poetry. Leeds, W. S. Maney, 1980. Hutchinson, Ben. Rilke's Poetics of Becoming, Oxford, Legender, 2006. Leader, Karen, and Robert Weiland, The Cambridge Companion to Rilke. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, 2010. ISBN 978-0-521-70508-0. Mood, John, A New Reading of Rilke's Elegies Affirming the Unity of Life and Death, Lewiston, New York, Edwin Mellen Press, 2009. ISBN 978-0-7734-3864-4. Numerous contributors, A Reconsideration of Rainer Maria Rilke, Agenda Poetry Magazine, Volume 42 Nos. 3 4, 2007. ISBN 978-0-900-2400-83-2. Pechota Volumia, Cornelia, Hemond Unheimlichkeit bei Rainer Maria Rilke und Lou Andreas Saloma. Copyright Literarische Wechselwirkungen. Olms, Hildesheim, 2010. ISBN 978-3-487-14252-4. Ryan, Judith. Rilke, Modernism, and Poetic Tradition. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, 1999. Schwartz, Egon, Poetry and Politics in the Works of Rainer Maria Rilke. Frederick Ungar, 1981. ISBN 978-0-8044-2811-8. External links, media related to Rainer Maria Rilke at Wikimedia Commons, works by or about Rainer Maria Rilke in libraries, Rainer Maria Rilke, profile at poets.org, International Rilke Society, Panther, English translations. Known works include the poetry collections Duino Elegies and Sonnets to Orpheus, the semi-autobiographical novel The Notebooks of Malte Laurids Brigge, and a collection of 10 letters that was published after his death under the title Letters to a Young Poet. In the later 20th century, his work has found new audiences through its use by New Age theologians and self-help authors, and through frequent quoting in television programs, books and motion pictures. In the United States, Rilke is one of the more popular, best-selling poets along with 13th-century Sufi mystic Rumi and 20th-century Lebanese-American poet Khalil Gibran. Biography, Early life. He was born Rena copyright Carl Wilhelm Johann Joseph Maria Rilke in Prague, capital of Bohemia. His childhood and youth in Prague were not especially happy. His father, Joseph Rilke, became a railway official after an unsuccessful military career. His mother, Sophie Ince, came from a well-to-do Prague family, the Inskinsellbergers, who lived in a house on the Herrengasse, where Rena copyright also spent many of his early years. The relationship between Fire and her only son was colored by how existential themes tend to position him as a transitional figure between the traditional and the modernist writers. Rilke was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, traveled extensively throughout Europe and North Africa, including Russia, Spain, Germany, France, Italy, and in his later years settled in Switzerland. Settings that were key to the genesis and inspiration for many of his poems. While Rilke is most known for his contributions to German literature, over 400 poems were originally written in French and dedicated to the canton of Valais in Switzerland. Among English-language readers, his best mourning for an earlier child, a daughter who had died only 1 week old. During Rilke's early years, Fire acted as if she sought to recover the lost girl through the boy by dressing him in girl's clothing. His parents' marriage failed in 1884. His parents pressured the poetically and artistically talented youth into entering a military academy, which he attended from 1886 until 1891, when he left owing to illness. From 1892 to 1895 he was tutored for the university entrance exam, which he passed in 1895. Until 1896 he studied literature. Rainer copyright Carl Wilhelm Johann Joseph Maria Rilke better known as Rainer Maria Rilke was a Bohemian Austrian poet and novelist, widely recognized as one of the most lyrically intense German-language poets, writing in both verse and highly lyrical prose. Several critics have described Rilke's work as inherently mystical. His writings include one novel, several collections of poetry, and several volumes of correspondence in which he invokes haunting images that focus on the difficulty of communion with the ineffable in an age of disbelief, solitude, and profound anxiety. These deeply